with liberty and justice for all. Sorry, I'm going to move back a little bit here. I think that might be better. Before we start, I want to make a special thank you to Shoemaker and Advisors for being our table sponsors today. We rely, thank you. Sponsorship support helps us pay the bills, and so we really appreciate it. Before we start, I do want to introduce some important folks in the audience, starting with our volunteer board of directors. So please join me in thanking Lee Lowry, our vice president and program chair, Deborah Belanti, secretary and communications chair, Art Wood, treasurer, Kim Droege, and Mark Proctor, and our past president, Yvonne Fry, who is also the founding president of the new statewide Tiger Bay Club. We also have some elected officials today. I would like to welcome Clerk of Court Cindy Stewart, County Commissioner Kimberly Overman, State Attorney Andrew Warren, Property Appraiser Bob Henriquez, School Board Member Karen Perez. Is Karen with us? Not yet. She'll be here. Sonia Brookins from the Soil and Water Conservation District, and her fellow Soil and Water Conservation District member, Mark Proctor. We always like to introduce candidates. Do we have any candidates with us today who'd like to introduce themselves? Well, we have one particular, yes, sir. Thank you. Do we have any other candidates? Yes. Thank you. Of course, we have another candidate, but she's going to be introduced in her own way. Any other candidates? If you're not a member, I'm sorry, I missed you. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks to everyone who puts themselves out there. I know it's not easy, especially these days. If you're not a member and you enjoyed today's meeting, please join us. It's only $75, and you can see from the flyers on your table. Please take a look at those flyers. We have a lot of great programs planned. I'm just going to mention briefly a few of them. Tomorrow, there is a screening of a film about Cuba and the embargo, and there's going to be a panel discussion that I'm going to attempt to moderate. Immediately following that, we'll also have a Q&A with the producer of the film. October 26th, we're going to have a very special Tiger Bay Club After Dark event at Oxford Exchange. After Dark meaning it starts at 6 p.m. and there will be adult beverages and appetizers included in the $10 charge, just $10. This is going to be about the great late House Speaker Terrell Sessoms, who wrote a book, a memoir about his life and times in Florida. And let me just say, he did live in different times when we were less polarized and elected officials worked together to try to get things done. The panelists are going to include Richard Sessoms, retired Judge E.J. Salsinas, former USF professor Susan McManus, and Richard Salem, I really encourage you all to come. I think it's going to be a very special night. On November 12th, we are presenting a program we are calling The Rays Aren't Kidding About Montreal. Rays President Brian Auld will explain why splitting home games with Montreal isn't as crazy as it sounds. That's going to be here, and I know you'll have questions for him. We're going to close out the year, December 10th, with all 5 Hillsborough County constitutional officers discussing how they serve the public. Some of them are here today. I saw many of them yesterday for the renaming of the Pat Frank Courthouse. I like saying that. Former Lifetime Achievement Award winner from the Tiger Bay Club, and it was an honor to be there. As you know, only members can ask questions. If you're not a member, we can fix that today, so you can ask that burning question. The member who asks the best question will win the coveted Garfield Award, as judged by our Garfield Committee. Today, the members who will be judging your questions, and they've got to be tough questions, no softballs. Roseanne Clemente, a Republican, Tim Burke, a Democrat, and David Lavery, a Democrat. And today's program will be available for later viewing on the Tampa Bay Arts and Education Network, on Spectrum and Frontier Fios, as well as TigerBayClub.com. I hope you're enjoying today's lunch, which is catered by Tony's Restaurant in Ybor City Institution since 1929. Please follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram for updates on future programs, and please tag us if you post from today's meeting. And now I would like to introduce someone who is going to introduce our speaker, a former president of the Tampa Tiger Bay Club and a local attorney. You've seen his name on the ballot more than once. Everyone, please welcome Gary Dolgen.
Thank you, Tom. Well, good afternoon, Tigers. It is my pleasure today to welcome Commissioner Nikki Fried for the second time to the Tiger Den. Commissioner Fried is the only elected Democrat statewide since 2012. She served as Commissioner of Agriculture when she was elected in 2018, and before that she was a public defender, a longtime advocate for criminal justice reform and marijuana legalization. As an attorney, she defended homeowners against the big banks during the foreclosure crisis, helped secure resources for children in the foster care system, and advocated for medical marijuana. When asked what she's most proud of in her service as Commissioner of Agriculture, she states that she has removed the NRA from weapons license permitting, legalized hemp for farmers, defended voting rights, and protected the environment. No Democrat has been elected governor since Lawton Chiles was reelected in 1994, and Commissioner Fried is running as a Democrat for governor this year and is here to tell us today why she believes she is the person to end that long streak. It's my pleasure to welcome Nikki Fried.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me here today. You know, as a Gator coming into the Tiger's Den, sometimes a little bit, off-putting, but thank you again, and thank you for the Cuban Club for having us here today. This microphone is a little, is that because I'm, all right, get back here. And so thank you for having me here today. And you know, as I've traveled the state, and now I've been commissioner for almost 3 years, I kind of recognized that on the journey to be commissioner, that I didn't really get an opportunity to really introduce myself to the people of our state, to tell you why I get up every single day and I fight for the people of our state. And so I'm going to kind of give you a little bit of my background as a person. I was born and raised in Miami. I have an incredible family. My dad is a diehard Republican. My mom is a diehard Democrat. As I was doing gay pride parades and Habitat for Humanity and soup kitchens back in high school, my dad was signing me up for NRA newspapers. So that's the life that I had lived growing up. But really, ever since I was young, it was always enforced into me what we call in the Jewish religion tikkun olam, to heal the world. that we have to be part of the solutions of our society, that we have to make sure that we are giving of ourselves to make our country, to make our state, to make our community better. And that's why I, throughout my entire life, have devoted myself to some type of service. And so again, when I was in high school, was very involved in my youth group, gave back every single day. Every Saturday night was traveling all over Miami, going to Publix and bakeries to collect food. And on Sunday mornings, we'd go down to Camila's house in downtown, Overtown Miami, and create soup kitchens. And my stepbrother, when I was in high school, came out to me, and I immediately became an ally of the gay community. It was doing gay pride parades back in the time when it wasn't well accepted. And then I got to the University of Florida, and for anybody who went to UF or knows anything about the system at UF, it's a little bit old boy network and very closed. And I came in to knock down the doors. And thank you for your service from your son as well, who is also past student body president, so thank you. And I got to UF, and I saw just how closed circuit it was, and how, again, that just because you weren't part of the secret society and wasn't a part of the bigger system, that you didn't have a seat at the table. So I came through and I knocked down doors and went into the Student Senate and wanted to be involved, and I saw that everybody around me was wearing khaki pants and blue blazers and white polo shirts and button-ups and bow ties, and I was in a tie-dye t-shirt and Birkenstocks. So saw that there was a lot of work to be done at UF, and became not only Senate president, became chancellor of our honor court, and then eventually student body president, the first female in an 18-year span, and saw again what it was like to break glass ceilings. And then after graduating, I went to Jacksonville, where I was in a big law firm in Jacksonville and was doing commercial litigation. And I sat there for a year and a half in my office doing research and writing for the partners, representing corporations. And I said, this isn't why I went to law school. I went to law school to do good. So I left and went back to Gainesville, where I was the public defender's office for 3.5 years. And while I was there, I really saw the injustice of the criminal justice system. And I know, Andrew, you were doing a much better job than we saw back in Gainesville. But I saw a lot of times that because I was a public defender, that I would get different offers because I was the PD and not the private attorney. And saw a lot of times that my clients were racially targeted, and saw more than not the first lines of the police report said the odor of cannabis was detected, and that was the probable cause. And I knew that that was wrong, because then it was my client's word versus the officer's word. And so I knew that marijuana reform was always going to be part of my journey in criminal justice reform. And then about 3.5 years after practicing at the PD's office, my dad calls, and he was practicing law down in South Florida doing real estate. And he says, Nick, we've got a problem. The banks have taken advantage of the people of our state and our country. They sold them the bad bill of goods, and now they're trying to take people's homes. Come home, fight with me. And so I came home, and I was in the county courthouses all over the state, defending our homeowners against the big banks. And I had a wall of fame in my office that every time I won a case and every time a homeowner was saved went up in our walls. But about 8 years into traditional practicing of law, I said, you know, I miss now being a part of change and being able to change policy. And saw so much corruption that was happening, whether it was in the PD's office, whether it was in the corporations or the banking. And then I get to Tallahassee. And I saw that that's where the corruption was. And that's where it started. And as I walked the halls of Tallahassee, and I saw that if you didn't have big corporations behind you and big campaign checks, your bills would die. And the people of our state were not being protected by what was happening in Tallahassee. So I got frustrated, and that's when I ran in 2018. And no one ever thought that a good Jewish girl from Miami was going to be elected Commissioner of Agriculture. Trying to educate most of our state that there is a Commissioner of Agriculture was the first battle. But I saw this position as an opportunity to kind of mold through and mend all of the things that have been so passionate in my life, because it's Commissioner of Agriculture and Consumer Services. So got to utilize my 15 years of being an advocate for whether it was my stepbrother in the gay community, whether it was families who needed an extra handout during hard times in food kitchens, whether it was protecting homeowners during the banking crisis. So I was able to take all of my experience and bring it into one position. And so with the help of Democrats and independents and Republicans all over the state, because I can tell you that I went through not one recount, but 2 recounts, and the amount of times that I'd get ballots and people calling me saying, you have no idea how many ballots we just saw that was a Scott DeSantis Fried ballot. Because it was important to me that I talked about issues that transcend partisan politics, talk about issues that are impacting everybody here in the state. We all know we've got an affordable housing crisis. We know that we have an environmental crisis. We know that we have an economy that doesn't work for everybody, that our education system is being funded at the bottom of the entire country. Those aren't partisan issues. Those are the issues that all of our neighbors talk about. Those are the issues that when you sit down at a dinner table that you're talking with your peers on. And so when I first got elected in 2019 and was sworn in, I really thought this was going to be an opportunity for the cabinet to come together. That you had all 4 of us under the age of 50, all with young families. I knew Ashley Moody from undergrad and law school, knew Jimmy Petronas when he was a legislator, and I really saw the first 6 to 9 months that we were going to be able to come together and put aside partisan politics and show Washington, D.C. that Florida knows how to do it right. But unfortunately, that's not what happened. And unfortunately, even before the pandemic, I saw that partisan politics was getting in the way of good public policy. But it didn't stop me. It didn't stop me from achieving so many of the goals and the promises that I made to the people of our state when I was running. I had 3 W's, for those who remembered my campaign, very message disciplined. Weed, water, and weapons. Very easy. So my predecessor unfortunately allowed for 13 months background checks to not be complete, and I have to take a stop for a second. Today is a really important day for the Parkland families. Today, Nicholas Cruz is pleading guilty. Thank you. That Nicholas Cruz is pleading guilty today to some of the charges. So today is a big emotional day for a lot of us from Broward County. We have a long way to go, but today starts, hopefully, the healing process. But I promise to those families and to those who have been impacted by gun violence that not only was I going to make sure that every single person who applied for concealed weapons permit was going to have a complete and thorough background check, but I was going to kick the NRA out of my office, and that is exactly what we have done. Second was water, something that I know that you all know too well here with everything that's happened at Piney Point and the red tide that has hurt both the east and west coast of our state. And so I came in and realized that our agriculture water policies were upside down. So we came in, cleared house, have new leadership inside, and have been starting to get to work to update all of our best management protocols, to make sure that we're finally putting our environment to the forefront. And 2 weeks ago, I announced that we're going to start rulemaking to eliminate styrofoam in the 40,000 different regulated industries that I oversee. That is a huge win for our environment. And the third was weed. And as somebody who has been a proponent both for legalization but the expansion of medicinal, I saw stories and heard stories all across not just our state, but across our country of what an impact medical marijuana was making on people's lives. So for those of you who are not part of this cause, you should be. Because everybody's got a family member who has somehow suffered or knows somebody who has benefited from medicinal. And of course, legalization has to happen. One, because of criminal justice reform, social justice reform, economic benefits, reduction of our opioid crisis, and because it's the right thing to do. Prohibition should have ended a long time ago. This is the last step. And when I announced my campaign in 2018, my opening video was about the juxtaposition between the overregulation of marijuana and the underregulation of guns. And that is what's wrong with our government and how we look at this in that perspective. And so when I came in, the first thing we did in my first legislative session working with Republicans, we legalized hemp in our state. This is an opportunity to create a product that is going to replace our styrofoams and our plastic and hempcrete instead of concrete, going to be used for fabrics. It's all biodegradable, better for the environment, already has created over 10,000 jobs, $380 million economic impact into our state, and we've just begun. The other thing that when I became a member of the Florida Cabinet, I was also a member of the Clemency Board, and pushing for restoration of civil rights. We were able to get the Groveland Four pardoned because a Democrat was elected to that clemency board. We have a lot of work to do. And unfortunately, we're living in a time right now that we've got partisan politics that's taking away from the better good of our society. And so when I decided to run for office, it's because it goes back to who I am as a person. I stand up against injustice. I make sure that you have a fighter that's in the Florida Cabinet, a fighter that's going to be with you every step along the way. And when I see an injustice like what's happening to our school boards, I stood up. When I was hearing that our school board members were being threatened for not only removal, but reduction of their pay, I called the White House and I said, we need your help, Mr. President. We need to make sure that if our school board members are standing up for our children and our teachers and our administrators in our communities, we must stand behind them and with them in this fight. And that following week, President Biden made that pledge publicly that he was going to help our school board members and bring down money. Huge win for the people of our state. And then when Governor DeSantis refused to apply, the only state to not apply for our SNAP and EBT benefits, $820 million he was leaving on the table would have been $375 per child in our state that are suffering. And he said it wasn't necessary. Let me tell you, I travel our state, I talk to family members, and they're telling me how they have to make a judgment call of whether or not to put gas in mom's tank to get to work the next day or to buy an extra loaf of bread. Those aren't decisions that a family should have to make, and a governor who stands in the way of bringing down this money to help those families. So we traveled the entire state. We had press conferences, and we organized, and what we call Jewish guilted him into actually bringing down and applying for this money. And now over 2.7 million families are going to receive benefits because we organized and we stood up for what was right. And then on the same account, he refused to apply for an extra $2.3 billion for education funding. It would have been $801 per pupil. That's a lot of money to go into our education system. And we, again, had to force him to apply for that money. We were the only state that had not applied. So I'm running for governor because I see the corruption of Tallahassee. I see that with a better leadership, that not only can we bring our state together, end some of this chaos, some of the anger that we are hearing across our state, but how many times in the last 25 years have we voted for constitutional amendments and they get to Tallahassee and they get dismantled? It's because we've had one-party rule for way too long. That is not how our democracy was set up. It's to bring people together and to listen to the people who are demanding change. So we have to try something new. We have to bring somebody in who understands, I'm not a career politician. I have only been elected for 2.5, almost 3 years. I'm not a career politician. I'm a career Floridian and a citizen, and somebody who cares so deeply about the people of our state. And so we have to do it differently. We've got to be looking at answers and solutions from a different lens and from a different perspective, and somebody who's willing to take on the establishment, to say enough is enough. The people are demanding a better quality of life. They're demanding a better education. They're demanding a better infrastructure in our state. They're demanding a better environment. And we as electeds have to stand up and come to the attention of the people and say, we're with you. A true public servant means also serving the entire state of Florida. I'm not running to be governor for the Democratic Party. I'm running to be governor of the entire state of Florida, to listen to all interests across our entire state. But we got to do it differently. We've got to put aside the partisan politics. We've got to listen to each other again. When did we stop listening and communicating and talking. We can do better than this, but it's going to take a change of leadership. It's going to take a different perspective to get these things accomplished. So I'm excited to be here today. I'm excited to get the questions, so bring it. And just again, thank you for, more importantly, your continued commitment to service of this community and to coming out of your days and working to better your community, to be part of this dialogue. People like you is what makes our state great, and so thank you again for giving me the time today.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'm going to do my best Donahue impersonation here, so we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. I'll start with Commissioner Overman. If you don't mind, I'm going to hold the microphone.
Nikki, it's great to see you again. We ran together. We both won. It was good. But I think what came out of that was the passion for all the communities. And your experience as Commissioner of Agriculture is interesting. In Hillsborough County, we have a lot of agriculture. And I know many of our, which is not the question I was thinking of earlier, but I'm asking this one now. Many of our fruit and berry providers or growers are challenged by federal legislation that causes them the inability to compete with Mexico.
Yep.
How have you worked on that, and how can we actually make that better, and who do we need to call?
Yes. So you're absolutely correct and have been very aggressive on this issue. So NAFTA, when it first was put into place, hurt Florida farmers. They created a disproportionate amount of support from Mexican farmers, that they have different standards for in the environment, different cost standards for employment, get subsidized by their government. And so when I got into office, the first thing I did was I flew to Washington, D.C. to testify against the implementation of USMCA. So that was the first thing we did. And so the USMCA is obviously the new NAFTA, because it was the same raw deal that our farmers were getting for the last 20 plus years, and got the entire congressional delegation to also stand united to vote against the USMCA. And unfortunately, deals were cut and that coalition broke apart. But the promises that I got from those that were pushing for the USMCA implementation was to have international trade representatives crisscross our state and South, and also in the entire South, also in Alabama and to Georgia, to listen to some of the issues that they were hearing on the ground. And of course, then that's when COVID hit. And so we couldn't do in-person visits, but we did have at least 4 hearings where I was able to testify unto the international trade representatives to say, this is what's happening in Florida. How can you not say that there's a disproportionate amount of overseas products that are coming into our state? The fact is that we have seen a 400% increase in tomatoes in the state of Florida from Mexico, and a decrease of Florida products across the entire state. And unfortunately, they did not come with a positive result, but we are still pushing. I was the only commissioner in the entire country to vote against the USMCA, where all the rest of my peers didn't understand why I was voting against it. We also had hearings beforehand with Georgia, with some of the blueberry growers, to bring light to this attention. So now that this is what's happened in the federal side, we continue to push for different types of sanctions if we're finding that they are violating any of the environmental standards and some of the other things that are in place, that looking for resolutions that in fact our farmers can go and actually appeal to bring more resources here. But in the interim, we have a responsibility, and I say this a lot. Fresh from Florida, it is our obligation that when we are going into food stores, that we are demanding that fresh from Florida produce is in our stores, that we are, as consumers, we control the purse strings, that we are buying, that you've got a choice, and there might be 2 for $3 strawberries, but if you're not buying the strawberries from Plant City, I don't know what you're doing. So it's important that we as consumers understand, and during this pandemic, it only elevated the problem and exacerbated it. We saw almost $500 million worth of produce spilled out and plowed under because our traditional menu, the avenues for our food, was disrupted between schools, between our restaurants, the cruise line industry, the theme parks. And so we stood up a Farm to You website where our consumers were able to go online and all of our ag producers were able to upload all of the products they had available, and tried to bring that connection to get around kind of the middlemen and make sure that the consumers can go directly to the farmers. And so that's how we also do it, is making sure that we know where our local farmers are, we're supporting them, we're being creative on how to get produce into our communities. The other thing that I did was last year during the pandemic, because there are rules and regulations of having to be USDA approved agriculture in order to get into our schools and to our food banks. And so I wrote President Trump at the time and said, I need you to release and to let through buying opportunities, that you don't have to be USDA approved. Let our schools, let our food banks buy directly from their local farmers. That eventually happened, but it was too late for so many of our farmers in the state of Florida. And I will continue to push that with new Secretary Vilsack to make sure that we are providing every opportunity available to our farmers to make sure that they are having a living wage, that they're not selling their land to corporations, because once that land is gone, it's gone forever. And so it's been a big part of my goals, is to really enhance ways for agriculture to get into the hands of our people, encouraging people to buy Florida-grown, fresh from Florida produce, and produce and bring new products into the state. That's why we also brought hemp, is to make sure that our farmers had an alternative crops when they might not be as successful in some of the other competition.
Thank you, Commissioner. Our next question is from a new member, Patrick Newman. I have a bias for new members, just so you said. Patrick, what's your question?
Thank you. So, hi, my name is Patrick Newman. I'm an economics professor and also a researcher. Most of my work deals with the subject of cronyism or crony capitalism. So these are policies that benefit special interests at the expense of the poor and middle class. It seems to me there's a great deal of cronyism in the cannabis industry, particularly regarding the vertically integrated cannabis licenses. There's about 22 of them. There's a huge backlog in the court system. Really, most of these firms aren't competing at all. The market is dominated by 5 firms. About 5 firms have about 80% of the market. 2 firms have about 60% of the market. This restriction, this grant of monopoly privilege restricts consumer choice, reduces product quality, raises prices relative, and this benefits the entrenched firms at the expense of patients who are using medical marijuana. So as governor of Florida, do you support increasing the number of vertically integrated cannabis licenses to improve patient access and quality to medical marijuana?
And you said Patrick?
Yeah, Patrick.
Nice to see you, Patrick. I'm going to take it one step further. We need to break up the vertical. That's first off. And so for those who don't understand, because those of us entrenched in the marijuana world, that the way that the program was established is that they were first creating 5 licenses in 5 different regions, and that they had to be vertical, which means that these companies had to cultivate, manufacture, produce, research, and distribute. And so you're asking, tell me any other type of business out there that's a thing. Because it's not. And so you're asking one company to be able to be experts in all of these different areas. And unfortunately, huge overhead costs, which then they can't even get back to the patients. So I have been a huge supporter of breaking up the vertical, because that way you allow more people into the industry, more entrepreneurs, let farmers cultivate, let entrepreneurs who want to get into the research side do the research side, those who do retail well, do retail. So not only would I support the breaking up of the vertical, but absolutely giving out more licenses. And I'm also very supportive of when we do legalize, because we're going to legalize, it's a matter of time, it's not an if, it's a when, that we in fact still protect our medicinal program. That is really important, and looking at what other states have done, they haven't done it right. Because what we need to be able to do is still have a robust medical program. And I saw it firsthand, not only just talking to patients across our state. I tell this story pretty often. So elections were supposed to have ended on a Tuesday night. They did not. They went 2 weeks, but Thursday morning, I got a call from my sister. And she's like, listen, we were trying to wait until elections were over, but they're not done yet. Mom's been diagnosed with cancer, and she's having surgery Monday morning. At that point, I couldn't even comprehend what was happening. But as my mom was now going through chemo and radiation treatments, And she was confused about what to do. And luckily, she had 2 daughters who understood the industry, how to get her immediately onto the registry. And I can't tell you how many times that I would talk to my mom before she actually started her products. And she said, Nick, I don't know if I can do this anymore. I don't know if I have the strength to get through this. And finally, she started getting cannabis products. And that gave her the strength to get through it, to, after chemo treatments, to be able to take products that gave her the strength to move forward. And so we have to have a program that's in place to take care of our patients, to make sure that there's research, to make sure that it is part of our healthcare system as annual benefits and co-pays, and to make sure that we're reducing the cost to our patients that are non-taxable. But we also then need to start working on legalization. And across the entire board, we need to get more people into this industry. Right now, there's 22 licenses in the entire state of Florida. There's 1 female CEO and no minorities. That is unacceptable. That when we are seeing black and brown individuals still going to jail and to prison for the same types of activities that white men are making millions upon millions of dollars on. And this is something that would change our society. And so on the economic perspective, we have to break up vertical, we have to give out more licenses, and we gotta bring more people into the industry to make sure we have better quality products, because right now, the products are not up to par. You go to different parts of California, Colorado, even New York, the products are better. And so the only way that we're gonna be able to do that, that's called free market, that's called competition, and we need to change the marijuana laws in our state.
Thank you, Commissioner. Our next question is from?
Mimi Osiason. Your background, experience, and positions are appealing, but how are you going to win?
Well, first of all, this is a fantastic question. So first of all, my master's is in campaigning. So I start there. So what we have seen is a lot of breakdown in the Democratic Party on communication, on messaging. And so what we did in 2018 did something very different. You know, so many times we hear from the Democratic Party and from Democratic candidates that as long as we get the blue numbers up, we're good. Well, that hasn't worked here forever. So what we did is we targeted 13 counties that were either purple or just red plus a few. And we made sure that I was present, because the things that we have to talk about, again, are above partisan politics. My first TV commercials was in Fort Myers in Lee County. And that's how we were able to win in 2018. And then bring a coalition with us along the entire way. And that's how we're gonna win again in 2022, is to expand the coalition that I already formed in 2018 and show accomplishments and show ways that we are saying, look, I'm not just making promises to the people of our state. I don't just talk the talk, I walk the walk. And so what we've also not done well here in the state, and I bet Alex can probably contest to this, is that we have spent so much time focusing on if the top of the ticket wins, the rest of the ticket wins. Well, both Alex and I can attest that that's not always the case. And so we've got to look at things from a different perspective. That if the bottom of the ticket wins, then the top of the ticket wins. Because if we start to empower those that have run for office in the local levels, making sure that they've got the resources, because they're the ones who are knocking on doors. They're the ones in the communities talking to people. I can't knock on every door in the state of Florida, how much I would love to. But we've got to make sure that the bottom of the ticket has the resources necessary, that we have a consistent message, consistently messaging, and a trusted messenger. The other aspect is I'm Commissioner of Agriculture. We haven't had somebody who's run for governor that really can get into the agriculture community. And there's going to be there's a 3% vote in the ag community. 1% I'm never going to get. They're the ones who still have Trump flags and believe that the election was stolen. But there's hard working members of our agriculture community that just want to know that they've got somebody who's going to be a fighter for them, who recognizes that we have 2 million Floridians that are part of agriculture, $150 billion economic impact, and to know that we feed 150 million people across the United States from agriculture here in the state of Florida, and to recognize and to respect that history, that culture, that hard work, that getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning to go out to the farms, and to be just able to somebody listen. And so we are going to be expanding our coalition, crisscrossing the state, going into areas that Democrats haven't gone to in a very long time. I was in Vero Beach this week. Vero, in that area, trumped 20 points. I walked in there, had about 150 individuals, Democrats and Republicans, that came in to listen. Granted, I had about 30 protesters outside, took that as a badge of honor. But starting to have the real conversations. Because again, when you go up to somebody and say, what are your concerns? What are things that are keeping you up at night? The issues are the same. Making sure that our families have health care, making sure that our children are safe in school, making sure that we have an environment that is safe, that is going to make sure that is there for generations to come, making sure that we have an economy that everybody can be prosperous, making sure that we can afford our homes. Those are not democratic issues. And if we start talking real, take away the D versus R, but talk to each other as neighbors, as citizens, we can build a state that isn't filled with chaos. And it has broken my heart to watch so many of these school board meetings and seeing adults outside fighting. That has to end. And the only way we do that is showing transparency, showing leadership, stepping up to the plate, willing to protect everybody in our state. And so that's why I talk about something new, and that we got to break this system, because I'm running to bring everybody to the table. Everybody's voice matters, and that has not been the case for 25 years.
Thank you, Commissioner. The next question is from?
Janet Green, I'm an attorney here in Tampa. My question to you is, when the infrastructure bill passes, what do you feel is the most important need that Florida has for that vast amount of money that's going to be coming to the states to be used for the infrastructure, the broadband, the streets and bridges and all that sort of thing?
All of it. Yeah, all of it. But when you look down at the bill and some of the components, and I think it's going to be really, really important that if President Biden is successful, this is how he has to be successful, is making sure, because what Barack Obama did not do is that after the Obamacare passed, did not travel the country and talk about what's in it. How is it going to impact people's lives? So President Biden is going to have to do that. This is going to be a large package, whether it is 1.5 trillion or somewhere in between, is to make sure that you're telling the people of our country what is in this bill and how is it going to impact people's lives. And so we need to have, look, our infrastructure is falling apart. We had an entire building collapse this year. So we have an environment that needs the support. We have an infrastructure in our roads and our bridges that are falling apart. And what that's not going to do, that's going to create jobs. And then you also have a provision, which I didn't know until yesterday, which I thought was really interesting, that there is money in there that is going to be for gun violence, that is going to go into our communities to help talk about it and to empower those at the local level with different types of community involvement and different types of events in there. So there's going to be so many aspects to this infrastructure bill that we got to make sure it is coming down for the right reasons. And let me tell you about broadband. Broadband's a problem in our state. And we always call it about the last mile, that so much of, that we put out these for technology and all of our cables, and then we stop. And there's a lot of Floridians that live in that last mile that doesn't have broadband. And we saw it really kind of elevate that problem during the pandemic, when so many of our children and our parents were home trying to work and trying to learn and couldn't get on the internet in order to just go through school. And so that's a major problem. And if you don't have access right now to the internet, you're going to fall behind in education, you're going to fall behind on information sharing. And the other thing that I really saw firsthand of why this is such a big problem with broadband, when I first came into office, I got a glaring statistic that one of the largest sectors of our country that are prone to suicide are those in our agriculture industry, because a lot of them are just barely making ends meet, are isolated, are away from general population hubs, don't have roads, don't have hospitals, don't have education systems, don't have even food stores in some cases. And so I wanted to create an app for our farmers for mental health, and so they can do telemental health. And as my team was going through and trying to develop the app and trying to figure out how to make this work, we realized, well, how is that going to help if they can't get onto the internet? And so it was one of those just glaring wake-up calls that I said, oh my God, this is a problem. And then tried to make sure that we started to look at, well, how can we get more broadband here? And realized that there was a problem with the current system of getting broadband. And so that's going to be a huge aspect of the bill. Look, we have a lot of work to do in the environment and a lot of new green jobs that are going to come from this infrastructure bill. So it's going to be on us to make sure and to demand when that money comes down from the current administration that we work on getting that money dispersed the way it's supposed to be dispersed.
Thank you, Commissioner. Our next question is from
Damaris Allen, and I'm a public education advocate. And over the last 20 years, we've seen the slow erosion of our traditional public schools all across the state. What are you going to do? What's your plan beyond the power of the veto pen to build back our traditional public schools where over 90% of our children are educated?
Absolutely. So as a product of our public education system, I do want to just brag a little bit about my school. So I graduated from Palmetto Senior High in Miami. And so some other famous people that are from Palmetto, let's see, Jeff Bezos. He should be part of this conversation because but for public education, he wouldn't be where he is today. Our current U.S. Surgeon General also graduated from Palmetto. So some of the best leaders in our state and in our country, some of our best entrepreneurs come from public education. And I have, as again, a product of public education, my mom was a teacher, and I know how important that education system is. And when we all voted for the lottery, it was supposed to add money into schools, not play this shell game that has happened. And I also used to represent Broward School Board. And I never thought that I'd still be representing Broward School Board, and so we've got to do a lot. Because what I've seen also, I used to be on the Leroy Collins Public Policy Institute up in Tallahassee, and we spent a lot of time studying what has happened with the expansion of our charter schools and schools of choice. And let me say this, not every kid is the same. Not every kid has the same learning capabilities, personalities, and so we've got to make sure that we create an educational environment that every child can succeed, but not at the detriment of our public education. And so what we talked about there too is that what's happening in our charter schools and the expansion of charter schools, one, they're not in parity with that of our traditional public as far as bonding, as far as criteria, when to keep, if you close down, what happens to those kids, and then they go back into public education but don't get additional funding when the kids come back into the school system. But what also has happened is that we have resegregated our schools. And as long as we don't bring people together and teach about diversity and teach about acceptance, we're going to create a segregated society. And so it is so important that we are putting not just dollars, but talking about how to empower our educators and making sure that we are giving them the funds necessary for not only our teachers to increase teacher pay, but it's not only the teachers. Our bus drivers, our school nutrition personnel. There's so many things that are wrong. We right now fund education 47th in the nation. We are the 3rd largest state. And until which time that we start putting our money where our mouth is on education, we're never going to get better corporations into our state who are going to have better paying jobs. We're not going to be able to bring people into our state, and we're not going to be able to keep our kids here either. And the public education system has to be strong, because if we don't fulfill the needs of our kids, they drop out of school, they go into the criminal justice system, and we've got to do a better job making sure that the school system is essential. This is the future of our state. How are we not funding education to the extent that is necessary and bringing in teachers? I mean, so many people graduate from the higher education system, and I can go on a whole soapbox about higher ed and student loans and all that, because I still have some. But if we are not empowering our kids and having our kids graduating from public education on our higher ed system and then going back into the classroom, we're also losing a significant amount of talent in our state. So we got to work on bringing more money in. We got to work on our curriculum and making sure that it's not just about STEM. STEM is fantastic, but STEM wasn't going to be helpful to me. And making sure that we are teaching our kids about culture and the arts and music. And we've gotten rid of PE. My God, there's so many things that are not happening in our education system, and we need to make sure that we are focusing on it because it is the future of our state. And what we have done in the last 25 years is disgraceful.
Thank you, Commissioner. Our next question is from
Jake Hoffman. I am a nice Jewish boy from South Florida as well. I wanted to ask you, most of your career you've been supported by Jewish community here in Florida, but as you run as a Democrat in your party, you've seen a more increasingly progressive view of the way that we treat Israel, the way that people are advocating for boycott, divest, and sanction Israel movement and everything. What type of governor would you be? Would you be a vocal advocate for the state of Israel? And the Jewish community here in South Florida, or would you maybe cry when we try and fund the Iron Dome over in Israel? What type of governor would you be?
That's easy. Jake, where'd you grow up?
Palm Beach.
Okay. This is a very easy one. And I'll tell you kind of stories to go along with backing up my policy. First of all, again, born and raised in Miami, a Jewish family, was very involved in my youth group in Nabrith, was president of South Florida, went to the March of the Living twice, which is 1 week in Poland, 1 week in Israel, to see firsthand what happened in the Holocaust, and to make sure that that was part of, again, who I am. And so my Jewish upbringing is intertwined in everything that I do. Why I'm standing here, I talk about Tikkun Olam, I talk about standing up for rights. So I'm going to tell you what I've done in the last 2.5 years as commissioner, because I don't just talk the talk, I walk the walk. So one of the first cabinet meetings that we had, we were going to be recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. And I'm walking down the hall, and my communications director at the time turned to me, it's probably about 2 months into my administration, and goes, "Boss, just want to let you know that you take this vote today, there's going to be a lot of people in our party that aren't going to be happy with you." And I turned around and I said, there's a lot of things that I'm willing to kind of have a conversation about, a lot of things that I can, expand my horizons on. When it comes to my support for the state of Israel, that is non-negotiable. And for lots of reasons, non-negotiable. So he turns to me and goes, "Got it, boss," and we moved on. Second, we took our first trade mission to Israel. And I spent 3 days, it was the entire cabinet. We had had a cabinet meeting inside the new embassy in Jerusalem. I went there about 4 days earlier so I can meet with about 40 different startup companies across Israel, Palestinian and Israeli, everything from agriculture and innovation, new technologies that they were working on, because they are the startup capital of the world. And so not only meeting with them, meeting with marijuana companies, because again, they are the leading experts in research when it comes to medical marijuana and what they're doing in Israel, trying to bring some of that innovation and technology here to the state of Florida. And when we were in Israel, had a very interesting experience where I had an opportunity with the rest of the cabinet to meet with Bibi, who was at the time the Prime Minister of Israel. But it was the morning after he failed to secure government. So the way it works in Israel is you have numerous parties, and you then have to form a coalition after the elections in order to create government. And he had failed to do so the night before. So it was a very interesting moment in history to have been part of these conversations. And so we got into the room with Bibi and some of his ambassadors and embassy members, and it was basically the four of us in the cabinet and a couple of our executive agencies. And I'm sitting right next to Ron. I'm sure he was not very pleased by that. And so we're having a very, honest dialogue about what is happening in the Middle East and Middle Eastern politics and the region. And then BB started having a very frank conversation with the governor about how important it was to get President Trump reelected. And this is a time when Bernie Sanders was, rising in influence inside the Democratic Party, and was starting to be a question whether or not he was going to be the nominee. And I stopped the conversation, and I said, Mr. Prime Minister, I need to stop you, and in all due respect, my name is Nikki Fried. I'm Florida's Commissioner of Agriculture, our only statewide elected Democrat, only Jewish member of the cabinet, only Jewish female ever to be a member of the Florida cabinet. And I am telling you that the people of our state are behind, the party is behind the state of Israel, and more importantly, this should have never been a partisan conversation, because the support for Israel has never been partisan. Not only because, of course, as somebody who grew up Jewish and had gone to the concentration camps, and so at first it was a support for a Jewish homeland. But what Israel has been able to do since then, become, again, a startup capital of the world when it comes to agriculture. My God, this is a desert, and they've created a fertile land, and they're using salt water and utilizing it in desalinization technology. How do we not want to take all of that and bring that here to Florida and to our country? They have space programs, their defense programs, medical, some of the most advancements in the entire world. We have to protect the democracy of Israel and everything that they bring to the table. So I have very frank conversations and was accosted actually in Orlando during the height of some of the violence a couple months, 6 months ago, and was with a Palestinian young lady who asked me these questions. And I said, listen, nobody wants to see bloodshed. Nobody wants to see innocent lives on either side be hurt. And I know that, and she was trying to ask me lots of questions, like there's no way in 5 minutes we're gonna solve world peace. They haven't been able to do it in thousands upon thousands of years, but it's about bringing everybody back to the table and conversations and respecting human life. And there's a way to get through this in peace in the Middle East, but yelling at each other isn't the solution.
Thank you, Commissioner. We are over time, but I hope we have time. Do you have time for a couple more questions?
Go for it.
Great. Our next question is from?
Lynn Hertak. The majority of Florida's 1,000 plus artisanal springs are polluted by excessive nitrogen concentrations and have depleted flows. These unacceptable impairments have greatly reduced the environmental health of our springs and their economic vitality for recreation. Ag is responsible for 70+% of the nitrate pollution in outstanding Florida springs. The best management practices have failed to slow this decline. What have you done, and what are you planning to do to protect and restore Florida's natural wonderlands of springs and rivers?
Thank you for that question. As I was saying earlier, when I came in, and so I'm going to have to do a little bit of a history lesson on kind of how the BMPs, which is best management protocols, work. So we inside the Department of Agriculture create BMP manuals for each of our different agriculture commodities. We create them with science, with technology, and then we give them over to DEP for approval purposes. We then enroll ag community members into the program. And if somebody is not following the protocol once they're in the program, then we send them over to DEP for enforcement purposes. When I came in, a couple of things that we recognized really, really early. One, that we saw that the BMP manuals, some of them had not been updated in over 20 years with new technology, new innovation, new science that are out there. So we started getting to work to update some of those BMPs. Because part of the program is if you don't know, everybody can be following it. But if in fact it's not productive and it's not helping, then why are we doing it? So we went through and started to really be very aggressive changing those protocols. The other thing that we have done, and we're not done yet, I mean, there's still a lot of work that still needs to be done on that front. And we also saw that a good chunk of agriculture was not even enlisted in the BMP program. So we have asked the legislature for additional funding to have increased staffing so the staff can go out to our agriculture industry members. Because let me stop here. 90% of agriculture are incredible actors. They are the best stewards of the land. if you are a cattleman, you're not going to want your land destroyed. If you are in any of our other fruits and vegetable production, you want to make sure that there's quality of water. No one wants to over-fertilize and over-pesticize their crops. I'm going to just kind of preface that. But if you don't know, then you can't change. And so we have spent a lot of time trying to get additional resources into the department to educate our farmers, to educate them on the new BMPs. And what we just did is we also just launched our Clean Water Initiative, which is the first time this has been done. That what's happened is that beforehand it was self-reporting on the BMPs. And we, at the end of the year, get basically an entire shoebox of receipts and paperwork, and it was self-reporting. So the first time ever, we were actually going out to the land and verifying everything. That there's now protocols and forms that people need to fill out, so we're not having to sift through at the end of the year shoeboxes. And most importantly, this is a glaring statistic. So before I took office, can anybody guess how many cases Department of Agriculture sent to DEP for violations? 0. Since taking office, 6,600. And so now DEP is working through trying to figure out, some of them have just been non-responsive. Others are trying to go through plans to make changes. So there's a lot of work to be done. I take that very seriously and working with agriculture to make these changes.
Thank you, Commissioner. Our next question is by one of our board members.
Commissioner Fried, I first want to thank you for coming to Tampa Tiger Bay. And I must say that I have enjoyed this experience immensely. And I think I'm going to ask you the question that might be the elephant in the room for many of us. You have to first survive a primary against a very seasoned politician who has, in fact, run from all sides of the aisle, except maybe Green Party.
That's next.
So my question to you is, and I admire your chutzpah for taking this on, but what made you think this was a good move politically?
For a couple of reasons. First and foremost, again, I go back to my foundation. I stand up when I see an injustice. And when I saw what Ron DeSantis has radicalized the Republican Party and saw what he has done to our state, I couldn't just sit back and not run. And look, elections are about choice. And we are going to spend a significant amount of time showing the people of our state why I am the best fit to be governor, why I am the best fit at this time to be running for office. And what I have said very clearly, I am not a career politician. People don't want career politicians. People want new perspectives, something new. And I was a Democrat at 17 years old. The first time that I registered to vote was in my AP Economics and History class. And I've never looked back. The things that I fight for today are the things that I have fought for my entire life. And the problems that we have today is because we've had 25 straight years of Republican rule of our state. And so when I take that message and I show the differences between Charlie and myself, and the issues that we have been fighting for or against our entire lives are different. The way we approach the electorate is different. The way we interact with people are different. And when the electorate understands our differences, and that's part of the campaign, there will be no doubt that I will be victorious in the primary, because the Democrats also want a winner and want somebody who has been able to crisscross our state, win as a Democrat, and are tired of losing. And we've got to energize our base and make sure they are excited to vote, not against Ron DeSantis, but for something new, somebody who's going to break the system. It's not just about putting a Democrat in that seat, because I fundamentally believe there's problems on both sides. And that if we don't elect individuals who understand that and are willing to even take on their own party at times, then we're no better. And so we've got to make sure that we are electing people that are seeing things from a new perspective, outside the box, willing to challenge status quo, willing, and I said this to the Democratic caucus last week, whenever I was in Tallahassee last, Monday. And I said to the Democrats, the House Democrats, I understand that you've been elected to represent your districts. I understand that you will continuously get piecemeals. Please vote for this bill here. We're going to have a hearing on your bill. We're going to put in a small little budget item for you to vote for us. I challenge the Democratic caucus to not buy that. That there's too many issues that are on the forefronts. We have redistricting coming up. Please don't cut a deal so that your seat is protected. A women's right to choose this session is coming up. And I'm going to ask women, and I'm going to ask women all across our state to unite, to march, to organize, to come to Tallahassee and organize like we haven't organized since 1973. And it's not just for the women in the state of Florida or the women in Texas, but it's for women all across our country. And so I asked the Democratic caucus, don't be bought off. And the fact that I had to say that tells you there's still something wrong in Tallahassee. And so we've got to find individuals to be running for office who are going to stand up, even as against your own party sometimes, and do what's right for the greater good. That is why you got elected. You got elected because you're supposed to be a fighter for all of the people of our state. So that's how I win. That's how I take the message to the people of our state and make sure they understand we're going to do this differently.
Thank you, Commissioner, very much.
Thank you.
You held this audience here well past our usual ending time. We had a larger crowd, I think, than we've had all year, so I appreciate that very much. I'm happy to announce that the winner of today's Garfield, it's very appropriate because not only is a new member, it's a weed question, Patrick Newman. And if you will stick around for a couple of photos, I'd appreciate it. Thanks everyone for coming.
Everyone.
Please turn in your plastic badges. They're very expensive. We don't want to lose them. Thank you.